Hey y'all, how we doing? Shout out to Bear Nation for tuning in for another episode of the Bear Necessities of Entrepreneurship, a podcast for the entrepreneur-minded, created by entrepreneurs, discussing the real stories that give you the tools to overcome challenges and stay true to your real self. As always, I want to give a shout out to our partners over at Fin. Fin is a social good platform that creates employee engagement and builds culture. We've teamed up with Fin to give back to the communities that we serve. For every episode, we will be donating $10 to the cause of choosing by our guest in the Fin platform. Enjoy today's episode. All right, Bear Nation, we are back again for another episode of the Bear Necessities of Entrepreneurship podcast. And I'm really excited to talk today with the CEO of a company called Swyg, Vincent Lonij. And so before I kind of kick in and tell you a little about Vincent and Swyg, Vincent and I have known each other for a little while now, actually. In fact, he went through one of our programs back in the day. And when I met Swyg and heard about what they were doing, I was enthralled. Being a former recruiter and having worked almost 9 years in recruitment myself, when I met Swyg, they're a recruitment tech startup with a mission to make hiring more fair and eliminate bias. I was hooked. I had to learn more. And super excited about that. And then when I got to know Vincent has a tech background. Originally was in physics, but then spent most of his professional career working on machine learning and AI. And so his story is so unique and fun, and excited to share the story of Vincent and Swyg. So with that being said, I'd like to say hello to my guest, Vincent. Vincent, how are you doing today?
I'm great, and thank you, Rob, for having me on your show. It's an absolute delight to be here. As you mentioned, we've already done some work together in the past as part of the program that you ran, and that was a delight. So I was thrilled to hear that you were doing a podcast and I could be a part of it.
Absolutely, and super excited to share with the listeners a little bit about your story. And one of the things I find fascinating, and we'll get into Swyg here in a minute, but I find your career fascinating. So how does one start in physics, turn tech MI or ML, AI, entrepreneur, building a recruitment startup?
So the thing that all these things have in common is data, but not in the way that you think. So the transition from physics to doing machine learning and AI is actually more common than you think it is, because the link there really is data, right? In physics, you spend all day working with data that you collect, data that you analyze, you try to understand the universe through the eyes of data, right? Which is super exciting. So then I went into the more pure data direction, right? Let's just do it with abstract data and try to learn from the data by itself. But the link to recruitment actually came when I was a mentor in a data science bootcamp. And my job there was basically to help people make a career transition from whatever they were doing before. Could be, like, I worked with people that were in sales before, people that were lawyers before, people that were fresh out of college, and they wanted to do data science instead. And one of the things I noticed there was that I worked with so many incredibly talented people that still struggled to get a job afterwards because their CV just didn't tick the right boxes. People looked at them and said, "You're a salesperson. Why are you applying for a data science job?" That didn't make any sense to all these hiring companies. And that made me realize, look, there's something really wrong here. The way that companies traditionally evaluate talent is making them miss out on some of the best people they could bring on board. And if I can solve that problem, it's going to make life easier for both sides, right? Companies are going to have access to hidden talent, and candidates will have a better chance finding the job that actually fits for them.
I love that. And, one of the questions that is age-old is, how do we evaluate talent, right? How do we truly evaluate talent? Whether you take an applicant tracking system, you take, there's the people approach, there's a lot of different ways to evaluate talent. And, everything is supposed to disrupt the recruitment industry. LinkedIn was supposed to change it. In fact, it helped recruiters, right? And the process has relatively stayed the same, give or take a few changes here and there. When you set out to overcome this, what was that burning desire? You saw these folks not getting jobs because their CVs didn't tick a box, but what was the underlying just passion that burned inside you to say, you know what, I'm going to just leave what I was doing beforehand and start a business around it? What was that? I mean, was there a moment? Was there a series of moments? Was it a feeling?
So I think, Rob, the story you're telling is sort of the romanticized version that people often think the world is like, right? Oh, someone has this sort of aha moment, this in the bathtub, and they jump up and say, ah, I found it, and now I have my calling. But in reality, it often doesn't work that way. It really was a number of different threads in my life that sort of came together at the same time, which really was more coincidence than anything else. But I took that opportunity to put it all together and build a business out of it. So basically, there were three things going on around that time. One, I had already decided for myself that I wanted to start a business. I just didn't know exactly what kind of a business. So basically, I left my previous full-time job and I said, okay, I'm starting a business. This has been a dream. I've wanted to do this all my life. I'm going to go do it. I don't know what this business is going to be about, but if I'm ever going to do it, now is as good a time as any. Let's go. Then that data science mentor job helped me pay bills for a while, right? So that was also there for a reason. But then the other thing I was really thinking about a lot at the time was how organizations work. So this has always been another interest of mine. How do people collaborate? And I was sort of interested from an almost academic perspective of, can you build organizations that don't have hierarchical leadership, right? This is a very abstract topic. There's some companies out there in the world that are putting that into practice. But it was always more of an abstract interest of mine. And if you put those three things together, it starts to look a lot like Swyg, where it's a business because I was starting a business. It had to do with recruitment because I noticed all these people that were in pain while I was a mentor in the data science bootcamp. And then the product we ended up building was really about how can we get candidates to work together to help solve that problem, right? Where there's not this hierarchical view on the process of the hiring manager just decides and that one person gets to say everything. But how do we turn this into something more collaborative where everybody that has a stake in that process gets to contribute? And that idea, like after many iterations, turned into what we today call peer-to-peer interviewing.
Love that. So I'm going to just put a pause there for a second because I think it's a great time to really talk about what Swyg is from a business and where it got started. But you made a point that I can't pass out, the romanticized version of the aha moment to a series of decisions that was made. And I'm guessing that wasn't like a week long. That was like a series of a couple months to put all those coincidences in order to make that happen. And that's the heart of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship isn't just a bing, light bulb went off, let's start a business. There's a whole process to that, and sharing that reality is something of interest. And so, I want to dig into that a little bit later too. So let's talk about Swyg. Swyg's a recruitment tech company. What does that mean? Tell me a little bit about the foundation of the company and how you describe it to one if you were, say, pitching it in a short kind of event.
So we work in the field of hiring. We call that recruitment or hiring or HR, but that's the area where we are. But if you think about what is Swyg, I think the mission of Swyg is still very close to what it was on day one, which is that desire to help candidates. Now, that's actually something that does make life, in a sense, both interesting and challenging, because it's usually the companies that are paying the bills, right? But you can't solve this problem if you don't keep the focus on the candidates who are the real humans in this process. I mean, at least they're the people that don't have as a professional job to apply for jobs, right? So they're the people in this process that need the most support. But at the same time, like I said, companies are our customers. And so the challenge that we face every day is how do we make that balance work? So that's really core to what Swyg really is. It's about helping candidates. So let me talk a little bit then also about the specifics of what do we actually have? Like, what's our product? What's the technology behind it? So I already mentioned peer-to-peer interviewing. So the basic concept is we have built a system where candidates interview other candidates through a series of short one-on-one video chats. And we have built a lot of machinery that works in the background to moderate this process, right? Support the candidates as they go through in terms of giving them the questions they're supposed to ask, what to look for in a good answer, what scales to rate on, but also things like detecting bias, detecting any kind of anomalies. Also, if someone's trying to mess with our system, like we can detect this, flag anything that needs to be reviewed by humans, and build all this machinery to actually make that concept of peer-to-peer interviewing into a reality. So that's where all the hard work goes. And the results have been surprisingly good. That is, when I first tried this out, this was a crazy idea, right? It's this idea. Why would you expect that candidates are any good at interviewing, right? They haven't been trained for this. Like, this sounds strange. Why would this work? Maybe they'll just all be unfair to each other. There's so many reasons why this might fail. But the reality has been very different. So I just said, look, we have all these questions. We don't know if it's going to work. Let's just go and try it. And even in our very early versions, we were able to create a version of the system that is comparable in accuracy to an expert interviewer. Right? And a big part of what the power is if you get reviews from multiple independent reviewers, that's actually better than having one really, really, really good one. Right? So getting more different opinions about one individual is more powerful than having one really, really good opinion.
Yeah. So a little bit of interesting data piece there, and you know, the thing. Oh, how do we know candidates can interview each other or even good at interviewing? Well, I'll tell you a secret: most hiring managers have never been trained on how to interview anybody's. They don't know what to ask. In fact, one of the biggest things that I see that's broken with the recruitment industry is that the recruitment process is that the lack of process. Right? You and I we start talking about, I don't know, the Yankees. And it's like, oh yeah, I walk out of the interview, my boss like, Rob, what you think of Vincent? Oh yeah, he was great. We bonded, sharp guy. You know, I think we could grab a beer together. You know, we chatted. You know, we got some similarities and commonalities. We both like the Yankees, and it's like that's what you're basing that interview off of. And we could talk for 30, 45 minutes, and we never even actually got into what are your skills, how have you overcome challenges, and then you walk out saying green light it, and you actually hadn't dug in on anything. And right, so having that process of checks and balances, which by having the candidates interview each other and having those independent reviews, you kind of go through a series of checks and balances on the way the conversations take place, which I think is quite unique and interesting. As a former recruiter, I remember I was a bit like, this is a little bit of skepticism. But you talked about that the data has told you otherwise. So let's talk about that. How have you gone about testing this, and where has the iteration and growth? Because, you know, the mission has been clear. Has the product changed? Let's talk about what this peer-to-peer interviewing system, you said, let's take it to market and test it, and the data proved otherwise. So what were those tests? What did you put to the market, and how did that reaction go? And tell us about that, you know, roller coaster.
Yeah, so that has also been a really interesting experience. So in the early days, so I'll tell you, since we're talking about startups and how you really get started from nothing, and so I'll tell you what the very, very first experiment looked like. So this was at a time when I was still doing all sorts of like work on the side to pay bills, and I was trying to pull this product together. And basically over the course of a week, I spent every spare moment I had, and then all weekend to pull together like a very rudimentary version of this app that really, like, it was literally held together by spit and duct tape. It was only going to work one time ever. And then I roped in as many friends as I could find and say, you got to come do this thing with me. I couldn't quite pull enough of them together on short notice, so I went on Upwork, and I think I paid a few people like, I don't know, $30 or something to just show up and use the app the one time at the same time, just to get that first little bit of data. And I didn't have engineers, didn't have a budget, I had nothing. It was just me trying to get that first ray of light on, like, does this have any merit at all? And that showed me, actually, this has a lot of potential. right? The outcomes, if you work on the data a lot, if you do some clever analysis, and there's sure lots of technical stuff in the background, but it has potential. Right? So that was what the first test looked like. The very first test was not with customers. It wasn't, after having engaged an engineering team. It was just like whatever the simplest thing is I could pull together in, I think, a week and a half worth of time. Okay, so that looked good. But now the question was, okay, these are people that I asked them, right? These are my friends. These are people that are like basically enlisted just to participate.
Yeah.
So I thought, now we got to go try this with real candidates that are actually applying for a real job, because the real world will always surprise you, right? So step one was to convince a company to use the system. Saurabh, your video is cut out there. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. Can you hear me okay?
So should I just keep going?
Yeah, because it records separately on each, like it records each separately, so it'll be fine. Like it'll work out on the final recording. All
right, no worries. So the next step was to go and test this with a company that was actually hiring. And I can go into a lot of detail of that journey, which also had a lot of ups and downs and a bunch of no's and then a bunch of like yeses that turned into no's until finally we pulled it off. And I'll also tell you there, like our first like larger scale test with this wasn't because I made a really convincing sales pitch to this company. It wasn't me going, here's my deck and here's all the different ways that you're going to make money. It's just that through networking, I met a guy who worked there who was also a physicist, by the way. So that's another like strange coincidental connection. And we got to talking about physics. At some point he asked, so what do you do? And I said, I have this system and I'm looking for people who want to try it. Would you like to try it? And he said, yeah, sure, why not? And that was it, right? It wasn't about, we're going to save you so much money as a company. Like that very first time was just somebody who was willing to take a chance on an early stage company. And so fast forward to the end of that, they ended up hiring the person that our system had picked out as the number 2 out of 100. 100 people went through the system. We scored them all. And the company did follow-up interviews afterwards, and they picked the number 2 out of 100 that we had ranked, essentially. So that was also this moment where I thought, there's really something here now that I've had other people use this and other people validate the results. Like we still get something that looks really close to, it actually looks like really, really accurate. And that's a story that has sort of repeated multiple times with our customers, where initially they look at this product, they say, candidates interviewing other candidates, that's mad, right? That's never going to work. And then afterwards they say, wow, I had no idea the results were going to be this good.
Yeah. That's so unique and interesting, and also crazy that you at a networking event and meets another physicist and then said, hey, I do this thing, would you like to try it, and took a chance. So you've had a couple of folks take a chance on you, and if I'm not mistaken, you've raised a bit of a pre-seed round, right? A venture-backed pre-seed round. Was about a year ago or so?
Yeah, that's right.
Right, so the fact that you raised kind of a pre-seed venture-backed round tells you that there's some scalability and belief in this, which I think is super cool. And look, 2 out of 100, that's amazing. Like the top 5 are usually pretty good, and it comes down to a little bit of a culture fit of like, who do you think is the best person for the job? It's not always number 1. It might be 2 or 3, depending on the way the team's built out, right? So like to hit with that accuracy is freaking amazing. So you have this faith in you. You've been having these stories kind of over time. How has the company progressed in the last year or so? What were some of the things that you've had to tweak? The data's good. You're seeing these things happen, but where has the company struggled to gain traction, or what are some of the things that's done really good, but the market needs to catch up to the process or this idea of peer-to-peer interviewing? Because it's tough to really take in as a viable process.
Yeah, and I'm glad you phrased it that way, Rob. So you said, where does the market need to catch up? And I feel like I spent way too long thinking that way, where I said, I've got this amazing thing. It's amazing. Other people just don't get it, right? And the market just isn't ready. And there's something wrong with the world for not wanting my thing, right? Whatever barrier we were facing, I always was sort of this like laser focused person. No, like this is the way to do it, and they'll see that I'm right. And now I look at the world totally differently, right?
Yeah.
So I always feel like this is the big struggle of being a startup. You never get off the ground unless you are 100% completely convinced that you're going in the right direction, because otherwise you wouldn't take the risk. But you're probably wrong anyway. And so at some point, you have to become completely 100% convinced of something else.
Yeah.
And making that transition is very hard, and knowing when to do it is really hard.
Absolutely.
I don't know any great examples of people doing it just right at the right time. I feel like this is something that everybody, when they end up in a situation like that, they struggle with. And so we went through a few iterations like that of thinking that we should go in a particular direction, like trying really hard, finding out that it's not the right direction, trying something different, and being wrong a bunch of times along the way. And hopefully now being closer to the right answer, right? I can't tell the future. That's always hard. But I always feel like every time we iterate, we get a little closer to that mythical product market fit where everything just takes off and suddenly life is easy. So this notion of, the market just isn't ready, I think is a really common thing that people talk about.
It is.
But once you start thinking like that, I feel like there's probably changes you can make about your strategy or your product that fits better with the market that actually exists, rather than to wait for the market to change, which might take a really long time.
Yeah. I think you put out this piece of, and what I've loved is from this whole start of this thing, right? You put out an app that was held together with spit and duct tape, right? And a lot of times just getting an MVP, getting good out there, sometimes not even good, just doable, usable out there to test and iterate, it's better than waiting till perfect. I think so many of us think or talk about entrepreneurship of product market fit, and we need to be perfect, and we need to have this figured out, and this figured out, and this figured out. And we want to say that the market isn't ready yet as is a crutch. And I think that the market may not be ready because you're not telling the market why it's ready. And there's an education piece that goes along with how you present the business, how you present the data, how you present the opportunity. And that it's not waiting for the market to catch up. It's, as you said, we're kind of repositioning it so the market understands. And then iterate, listen, iterate some more, listen, iterate some more, test, fix. Sounds like something you know very well in terms of when you go through any sort of hypothesis of figuring out any type of scientific background, right? That's all building a business is. It's putting something out and testing and building. So as you've kind of gone through these kind of, iterations and testing, what are some of the big takeaways? What are some of the things that you've learned about the business and about this peer-to-peer space that have just, wowed you?
Good question. So there's a couple of things that I can share there. So one thing is something that I mention a lot when people ask about candidates competing. Right? So sometimes people ask this question, well, candidates are interviewing other candidates. Won't they have an incentive to rate the other person lower than they think they should be? Right? And one of the things that we've learned, which warms my heart and has given me renewed faith in humanity, is I'll tell you, we thought about this, right? Maybe candidates are going to rate other candidates too low. So we built system after system after system to detect all different kinds of cheating and different ways of people being unfair, people just putting random numbers. We just made endless ideas of, if anything ever goes wrong, we want to catch this. Now that system actually gets triggered on a fairly regular basis. But the vast majority of cases is candidates that rate other candidates too high. And so essentially, it's candidates being really supportive of each other. They start to look at this as a collaborative experience because if you're a candidate, if you're looking for a job, you know how much of a pain it is, and you know what other people are going through. And if you're in that mindset, you're actually not in the mindset of I'm going to undermine someone else. You're in the mindset of we're in this together and we should support each other. And that has honestly been a surprise, right? I thought it was going to be kind of even, right? People just make some mistakes on the left and some mistakes on the right, and it'll just sort of even out. But the fact that it's really been very lopsided when we see sort of quote unquote unfair ratings, they tend to be candidates giving scores that are too high and just being too nice to each other, I think is really an indication that they perceive this process as a collaborative process.
Yeah.
So that's been like a really cool thing we learned along the way, which I think is also unique to our product.
So I really think that's, amazing and also awesome, right? And so tell me, I guess, as I think about this, right, and, I know candidates are interviewing each other, right, this peer-to-peer, and I know they're, in essence, competing at the same time, but, there is this kind of approach of building a community around your candidates and having, if they interview multiple times and they do this thing and they get involved in the community and are getting this practice, they're, one, getting better at their own interviewing skills, two, getting better at being an interviewer, which could, if they're going for like a more of like a growth role where they could be a manager in a year or two, like that experience, but also multiple opportunities, right? The more that they do and the more they talk, the more opportunities I'm guessing they have to be noticed for different roles, right? So there's that community approach to it, which I think is really cool. So tell me, I think that's a great question so tell me how it works from the candidate side and tell me how it works from the client side, because there's two sides of this business, the candidates and then the client trying to fill a role. So tell me how it works or how it looks from both sides.
Yeah. I'd love to. So before I do that, though, I want to react to one thing that you said there, which was about candidates having the opportunity to qualify for multiple roles. So this is something that's part of a transition we've gone through recently and how we've sort of changed the way our product works. In the early days, we were working with one company at the same time and one role at the same time. So we had no choice but to put candidates in a session together that were actually applying for the same role. And there was always this sort of degree of awkwardness there of, well, these are people that are applying for the same role, and we try to position this as much as we can as a collaborative process with the community, and you can learn from it. But there was always sort of in the corner sits this sort of question of, but they're going for the same job. So we changed that and just said, okay, look, we need to have multiple similar positions that are open at the same time. So that from a candidate's perspective, this really isn't about competition anymore. There's many roles available now. We work with multiple companies at the same time, so that when a candidate interviews through Swyg, they interview once, but they can qualify for jobs at a range of different companies. And that actually has made it a lot easier for us to just talk about how this should be a community and it should be a collaborative process, because this isn't a zero-sum game. This is not a question of, if you get the job, then I don't. It really has become a question of, if we work together, then we both have a better chance of both getting a job, possibly at the same company or at multiple different companies. But the reality has become closer to the ideal because we changed our product to be that way.
I love that. And it also creates, by going through this process and interviewing as peer-to-peer, you build your network. And there's absolutely huge potential and value in building a network of like-minded and strong and growth individuals that are looking to better themselves, right? So I think that's, it's amazing, kind of just like as we think of peer-to-peer, that's kind of what's stuck in my mind with, obviously the recruitment process, right? Like you interview one and then you figure out 50 different places to slam their CV to and put out. And so I love that. But if a candidate interviews and goes through this process, is there value to them doing, multiple peer-to-peer interviews? So interviewing multiple people, does that help them get ranked higher? Is it just one minimum, or is there a scoring system? I know you talk about a lot of back-end stuff, and I don't want to go too technical, but is there value to multiple interviews?
So generally, yes, right? So the way we have it set up now, I feel like I'm lagged by one question, right? Because you had this question before about how does the process work, and I feel like I should answer that, and then the next one will become more clear.
I know, you brought up a great point. I just stacked a question on top of you. So if we want, let's go back. We can go back and answer the first question.
So
and then we can
let me just very briefly explain how the process actually works, because that will just also help everything else fall into place. And this is the way that works today, right? So we iterate on our product every day, and it's a little bit different every day because we keep improving it. But so the general process, what it looks like is, as a candidate, let's start with what this looks like from the perspective of a candidate. You find Swyg, right? There's many ways to find Swyg. You can just go to our website, you can sign up there. But typically it's because candidates apply for a job. Then we invite them through a peer-to-peer interview, and we also explain how the process works, and we explain what the value is, and that this isn't just about qualifying for one job, but it's about multiple jobs, and how like being judged solely on a CV is actually something that's very detrimental to candidates. There's actually value in participating in this process. You get to learn something along the way, see how other people behave in an interview, which most people have never seen before. So we go through this whole sort of process of explaining to them how it works. Then from a very mechanical perspective, they pick a time. Then at that time, they log into our app, and they're coupled with a partner. So that's a short one-on-one video chat where we provide the instructions in terms of what people are supposed to do. So one of the people is assigned the role of interviewer, the other is assigned the role of interviewee, and we give them a question, right? So the interviewer is supposed to ask a specific question, and we tell that interviewer what to look for in a good answer. So that chat takes about 5 minutes. Then both participants fill out a short form about each other. And then they're coupled with a new partner, now in a different role. So if you're the interviewer before, you're the interviewee now, and vice versa. So that process repeats about 8 times over the course of an hour. And so the whole thing is over in less than an hour. And after that, we provide feedback to the candidates. Right? So we get some scores out of this process, which we share with candidates. This is something that then also becomes available to employers. So what we do at the moment, so looking at the employer side, what does this look like if you're a hiring company? So this is one of the changes that we made recently, where now what we do as a company, you can just come to us and say, we're looking for a person that looks like this. And at this stage, we have a fairly extensive network of candidates that have gone through Swyg. And I call it a network because it's candidates that have rated other candidates, right? So it is, in a sense, a referral network. This is a group of experts, and they've all interviewed each other in different permutations. And so some people come out of that being consistently rated very highly by their peers. And we can actually break this down by different questions, right? So we now know of everybody that participated, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses. So you come to us as a company, we can say, well, we already know a lot about a lot of candidates. And so now if we know what you're looking for, we can actually give you a list of 5 people right away. So that's what this now looks like to companies, where
and
we
those
take
5
this
people,
whole sourcing element off their plate, right? Where people have to post jobs or go call people on LinkedIn or whatever it is people do to find candidates. They just come to us and say, this is what we're looking for. And we say, well, here's 5 people that have been highly rated by their peers. Just go and talk to them.
That are active, and then
they're active, they're engaged. We know they're looking for work because they recently applied for a job. We know that they're engaged because they've gone through interviews, right? You don't do that unless you're seriously looking for a job. So they're highly motivated, they're engaged. We know that they're good. Just go and talk to them. Just go.
Yeah. Well, I think it's cool because, recruiting companies like, we have candidates we can send you within 24 to 48 hours. And what they do is they go and reactivate their whole network. And some of them are like, we have a bench. No one has a bench, right? They have to go reactivate it, and it takes 24 to 48 hours to figure out who's still available, who's not, create a short list in this whole process. And with the Swyg platform and the way that you have this kind of rolling basis of being built, you know who's active because there's consistency within that by being a part in the community approach that's saying, hey, we're still here. And then I'm guessing there's a feature where they could say, hey, I've gotten a job, I'm no longer on the market, and kind of tells you that, hey, they're on hold until they're ready to come back, and then you save all that data and then reactivate them, which seems like a much more efficient process because you have a lot more high activity of people who are ready to go at a much quicker pace, which is, I think, amazing, because then there's like tools that put that in practice versus like what we used to say. And again, as a recruiter, some people had the really good active networks that they can do that, but I mean, not the same scale that you're doing for your clients now, and the way that the data that you can provide of everything that you have stored.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, so I usually phrase the value like a little bit differently. So there's that, right? So one of the big challenges of like anybody who's trying to hire is to find candidates that are engaged, right? So basically, that's a nice way of saying candidates that are actually looking for a job, that are open to even talking to you. But part of the reason that problem is hard to solve is because if you're a hiring company and you think about what does your ideal candidate look like, the picture you come up with is probably not that different from the picture that your competitors have come up with, right? So if you go look for that on LinkedIn, sure, you can find people, but your competitors have found those people too. And so now you're one of 50 people that reached out to somebody on LinkedIn because they have a great LinkedIn profile, and now you're surprised they don't respond. Well, it's because they got 49 other messages in addition to yours. So the key to solving this problem is to look beyond the static profile, right? It's not that people who have an amazing LinkedIn profile are bad. It's just that you're missing out on a whole bunch of hidden talent and people that are actually very good, but maybe they're just not very good at writing a LinkedIn profile, or maybe what you thought a good candidate looked like isn't actually what a good candidate looks like, right? Maybe you are looking for people that used to work at brands that you know. But there are lots of other good brands that you've never heard of, right? Just because you don't know a brand doesn't mean that brand is bad. So there's all these problems associated with judging somebody based on the static profile that makes you miss really good people. And we can make that hidden talent visible. And so if a company goes to our network, essentially they're tapping into a hidden talent pool that all their competitors don't know about. That's what the real power is.
Yeah, that's also unbiased. And the fact that, you're only finding what you're looking for on LinkedIn in a static profile. We're unbiased. We're showing you the full picture because we have actively engaged candidates that are getting reviewed, that are getting scored, that are, we have video, we have all these things to show you. And it's like, you're creating a very diverse and amazing network of strong fits based on the full picture and not the one that is static or shown.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you're right. That one person that's a great profile on LinkedIn that's got 50 offers, they could be awesome. They could be like really good.
I'm sure
they
they're
could
amazing,
be also,
right?
They could also be a good bullshitter. They could also be a good bullshitter that knows how to position themselves. And so, there's all kinds of things that you have to dig into. And so when you have more data and more ability to take that data and make educated decisions, you tend to create a more diverse, engaged employee base, right? Have the right candidates come into. I love it. I mean, it's now I start to see like where the mission ties into the actual process that ties into the service offering, right? It's like a product, service, and mission all tied together, truly tied together into the way the platform and the technology works.
Yeah. So we always say we want to make hiring more fair for everyone. That does not mean we're going to make companies hire people that are less good, right? That's not fair. Like what would be fair is the company hiring the best person. The problem is they don't. Right? That's why the system is unfair. So this isn't just about, okay, we want to create like equality or diversity or anything like that. That's sort of like looking only at half of the problem. The observation is that because of what we as sort of a catch-all term called bias, companies are making bad hiring decisions. Like they're not actually hiring the best people. And so by creating a more fair system, like people that deserve a chance get a chance, and companies end up with like a better team. So everybody wins.
I mean, I love that. And I know we're getting close to time, but I had this thought. If I was a company and I came to you and said, hey, Vincent, right? We have, in the last few years, say last year, we posted 6 jobs. And with those 6 jobs, we've gotten 6,000 to 7,000 applications. We've filled 4 of them. Could you help in that regard too? With the technology, be able to say, well, we can take that and create like a candidate pool for you. Is that possible? Just like
It
thinking
is,
about this
yeah.
peer-to-peer network, like thinking about hidden talent in places where, I think about my days in recruiting, and I could post a job posting on LinkedIn and all the major tools and have 500 resumes in 72 hours. They're not always great, right? But the problem is that I miss great ones because I'm exhausted looking at 500 resumes.
Right.
So could we applicably take this and say, hey, you can do this for a company internally and create process and systems around that too?
Yeah, absolutely. But I'll tell you what I would love to do. So thinking about that situation, what I think is, again, like thinking about fairness, right? What I would want to do is I want to go to that company and say, okay, you've got, and you said 5,000 applications.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll get those 5,000 people, at least the ones that want to, right? It'll be optional for them, and say, hey, why don't you do a Swyg interview? And then that hiring company will give them first dibs. But after that, I want those people to go into our network so we can give them more opportunities, right? Because then it becomes fair. Then candidates get something out of this process. Okay, obviously, they get learning and experience from just seeing other people interview, but they also get like genuinely better chances of finding a job if they don't get hired by that original company.
I love that. I mean, it's a win-win, right, for the company to also take this, like, because some of the things that companies lose out on is that, they get tons of applications and they can't respond to everybody, and they don't say like, hey, thanks for applying, you're not moving forward, and so you lose this. So having Swyg come in, it helps them activate that and provide some context and also training. If nothing else, they're getting a great experience. And two, that opens up to other doors, right? So the fairness aspect of opening doors. So it's actually a win-win for the candidate, the clients, and Swyg, creating a truly active community of amazing people that leverage way beyond anything that anyone else is doing because of the technology behind it that allows you to scale.
Yeah, so the technology is a key enabler, and that's what enables us to do this, right? But one thing just about breaking barriers, right? So if I think about what's the barrier that we need to altogether break through, like you're talking about this company that got 5,000 applications. If I go to them and say, okay, I'll help you, but then I want to be able to help those other candidates also get jobs, I think the first reaction would be, am I allowed to do that? Is that okay? Like, is that something that I have to ask my legal team about? And in a sense, it's asking companies to like step a little bit out of their comfort zone to think about what candidates really need.
Yeah.
Because yes, you can totally do this, right? Of course, you have to ask candidates permission.
Yeah.
You have to do a thing, but then you help somebody, right? And I think that one of the key things that we need to just make the whole hiring process work better for everyone is for everyone to be a little bit more open, to step out of their comfort zone, to do the right thing for everybody, like all the stakeholders in this process, and not just look at their own immediate self-interest. And by extension, that will come back to you, right? So employer brand is something companies always talk about. And I just want to share one more anecdote of my personal experience. When we were hiring, I interviewed so many people. Oh my goodness, this was before our product was fully ready, and I was interviewing manually everybody. And I still felt very strongly about, okay, you got to do the right thing for candidates. So I said, okay, I'm going to offer everybody a feedback call. And so even especially the people who rejected, I said, look, you want more feedback, we'll get on the phone together. And so I did this with several candidates. And what some of them told me was basically, Vincent, nobody's ever done this for me before. Like no one's ever taken the opportunity, especially the CEO of a company, to sit down with me after the interview process to really tell me about, okay, so here are your strengths, here are your weaknesses, here's how you can improve. That candidate, like I'm thinking of a specific person at the moment that told me that candidate isn't just a rejected candidate that sits in our talent pool. That's a candidate that's an advocate. Right? Yeah. That's somebody that I know I can go to that person at any point and say, hey, do you still want to work for us? And they're going to be interested. If I say, hey, would you be willing to endorse us on whatever platform, they'd be willing to do it. Like that sort of goodwill you actually get by stepping out of your comfort zone and doing something that's good for somebody else, even though you might not see any immediate self-interest. And I think if every company did that, it'd be a different world.
It would. It'd be, and let's take a step back and, not shoot so pie in the sky, but even if like everyone out there listening, everyone takes that approach every day, we make a better world incrementally by each one person that does that, each founder, each entrepreneurial minded person that's listening that may start a business someday. And I think that's really cool because when you talk about that, not only are they a brand ambassador, would, endorse and everything, they might be in a place where they're hiring at some point and want to use Swyg and bring them in and say, hey, what we're doing is not working. What do we try bringing Swyg in? In fact, I have a company that I work with that have an episode coming out here in a little bit. Every candidate that interviews with them, they'll send a feedback email and offer a phone call to provide good feedback. And just by doing that, like the amount of the feedback they've gotten, people are like, why are you doing this? Because we care. And in fact, every person that ever applies to the company will get, even if it's automated, get an email that just says, hey, thank you for applying. We did have a large number of applications. We wanted to let you know that we're not moving forward, and we would love to give you specific feedback if we could. We just don't have the ability or technology process to do that yet. But we appreciate you so much for wanting to apply for this role. And if there's anything we can ever do, let us know. And it's like there's just little touches about the employee experience, right? Because when you think about the employee experience of a company, it doesn't start when they walk in the first day. It starts from the first touch point they have with your brand, whether it's applying on LinkedIn or Career Builder or Monster, to when they hear back, to when they have an interview, to, hey, we'll get back to you in 3 days, and they don't hear anything for 2 weeks. All those little things matter, especially with millennials and Gen Z who are digitally connected, hyper connected, that know how easy it is. This is always in our hand. We can shoot a text. Hey, sorry, no update as of right now. But instead, we're so afraid to just pick up the phone and call them and give them any feedback, even if there's no feedback, because we told them we'd call them by a certain day. If we do those little things more, it makes a big difference. So I love that you share that anecdote, and I love the idea of what Swyg is building. And when you think about the values and the mission and what the product can do, there's so many cool things. And so I've been loving getting to hear this from the founder and really understand kind of what you're trying to build. And it's not easy. You've already mentioned multiple times the product market fit is still getting there. You're iterating, but you have great clients that have tested this, that have been happy. You've seen this work over and over again from the candidate side. So if anybody out there is listening in a Bear Nation that is hiring for a role and that would love to try Swyg, please reach out to Vincent. Give him, if nothing else, test it out. Give him some good feedback, right? We want to create a community here about providing feedback. What do you have to lose? Nothing right now. And so I'm just going to, if I was in a hiring position, I would try Swyg. And so, this isn't like, hey, Rob's going to endorsing all these companies. It's just, hey, this is what entrepreneurship's about. And Vincent talked about the value of networking and asking for help and just being intentional and seeing what happens. So if anyone in Bear Nation is looking to hire and wants to try out a new technology, a really cool technology, doing great things for candidates and communities, you should check out Swyg.
So I'll add one more thing to that, Rob. So your audience is entrepreneurs and startups. And just because we're a startup ourselves, I love working with other startups. We've seen so many companies hire. We've seen companies do it really well. We've also seen companies make mistakes. Even if you feel like, oh, the technology isn't right for me, get in touch anyway. I'd be happy to just share my experiences, do another startup a favor. We really, as entrepreneurs and startup founders and everybody working at startups, we got to stick together and support each other. So even if you're not sure and you just need some advice, I'm always there for that too. I talk with founders every day. I talk with recruiters every day. I've seen how other people go through this process. Hiring is really hard. Don't try to do this alone. There's people like me who can support you, either with technology or just with a phone call. So I'm all in when it comes to supporting the community.
I love that. And as a recruiter, I spent 9 years in recruitment. I've recruited for technology, sales, marketing. I've worked with enterprise Fortune 500, Forbes 100 companies all the way through early stage. And I coach on this recruitment process and building a process. And so whatever you decide to do, whether you have an internal talent team or you use an outside recruitment firm or you bring in Swyg or you do a combination of all three, learn from each other, right? The whole point of recruitment is hard. So find a way to tie the loops together and make life easier and understand everyone goes through this challenge. In fact, as we know today, right, in the current climate, we have one of the biggest hiring booms ever. And the way that COVID has changed the future of work to hybrid and remote working roles, people leaving and changing, because during the pandemic, we saw the best of bosses rise to the top. And we also saw bad bosses who didn't know how to lead. And so they lost faith from their team. And so things are going to shift and change. And people who want to be in larger corporates with stability and work in an office or have a hybrid role versus those who want more of a flex option, everything's going to change. And hiring is going to be at the forefront over the next probably 6 months as the future of work truly changes coming out of the pandemic. So, the fact that Vincent's even just saying, hey, I'll take a call with you is pretty awesome, because I think we're all going to be going through a lot of major changes in our process. So, Vincent, I know we're getting close to time, but I'd like to finish every episode with a couple of key questions, right? Mm-hmm. This is an entrepreneurial-minded podcast for entrepreneurs. What advice would you give Gen Z or millennial entrepreneurs right now?
Yeah, good question. So the thing I would say is probably aimed at early stage entrepreneurs, even though I think it's still valid for at any stage. But it would be build an audience before you know what your product is. Your product is going to change anyway. Right? Don't wait for your product to be ready. It's never going to be ready. Just go. And you can go start a podcast, right? Or you can start a Twitter account, or be on LinkedIn, or write a great newsletter, be informative, or be opinionated, or whatever it is that your style is. There's so many options out there to start building an audience or a community or a group of like-minded people around your vision and your mission, even if you don't have a product. That's perfectly fine, and it's going to pay off a lot in the end. Once you want to launch your product, having a whole bunch of people that are already interested in what you're doing makes everything a lot easier. So whatever it is that you're doing, make sure that you move the community building and audience building earlier in your pipeline.
And what I love about that is that you do that with intentionality and authenticity, and you're sharing, hey, these are the ideas I have. You also get amazing feedback from audience about where your product should go. So it's almost like doing product discovery before the product's out, and you can leverage ideas and hypotheses, right? It's amazing that we think we know better until we put it out, and then we decide to get feedback. And I don't know if it's because we're scared or what, but I love this because intentionality and being authentic in building your audience around what you want to do and what you're looking to do is invaluable. And you said,
and I think that's also a power that a lot of entrepreneurs underestimate about themselves. So what you talk about is authenticity, and there's nobody like someone who's trying to start their own business in terms of being passionate about what they do, because otherwise you're not going to start your own business unless you're passionate about what you do, right? So just talk about what you're passionate about, be authentic, and people will talk to you.
I love it. What do you think, as an entrepreneur, what do you think your superpower is?
Yeah, I was thinking about that one. So actually was thinking about this, and do you know this, the Fantastic Four? Right, so
yes.
It's kind of old school comic book, and the leader of their group is Mr. Fantastic, and his superpower is basically that he's very elastic. He can stretch a lot, which really seems like a silly superpower in a comic book, but it's actually very useful if you're the CEO of a company, because you always have to fit into the shapes that are the gaps between everybody else. So being able to fit into those gaps, noticing what the gaps are on your team, and being versatile enough to actually change the shape of your body to fit into the gaps is really, really useful to just be able to move things forward. So I'll pick that one, Mr. Fantastic's elastic power.
I love that. And I love the Fantastic Four. As a kid growing up, it was definitely one of my favorites. And I think that's such a cool take on using a superhero, and a superpower that you grew up with, and what it means as an entrepreneur and a CEO. Because you early on, you fill in every gap. sometimes it's a power of one, sometimes a team of 20, and you're filling in gaps between 20 people.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about it that way. If you're solo founder, you got to stretch, right? You got to
Exactly.
fill up all the space. But once you have a team around you, now you're filling in the gap. So you have to be really elastic to be able to like make it through all those different stages of your company.
I love it. And there are tons of stages from when you start and launch to iteration to everything. I mean, what people don't understand is from where you start to where you go Series A, it usually doesn't happen in the first 6 months. And, I can't tell you how many times I hear people, our goal is to be a $5 million company in the next year. And I'm just like, how with no audience, no brand equity, no brand awareness, and no real product on the market, how again? Right? Be realistic and know that this is a journey that you will fit in over time. So, what is one book, resource, or piece of content that you should be reading, consuming, that you would recommend right now?
So the book that came to mind is Eating the Big Fish by Adam Morgan. And it's basically a book about branding, but it's about startup branding in particular, about how if you're a startup, and like you already mentioned, like you don't have brand equity, like nobody knows you, you got to build a brand. But you don't do it the same way that, say, IBM would. The approach is very different, and it turns out there are ways to leverage that really effectively because you can basically be the challenger to the big brands, and that's something that's very appealing, especially to early adopters who are exactly the people that you need in your business. So this book basically talks about a number of examples of companies that have done that successfully. So that's one that I would recommend.
I love it. And I've heard of it, and I've done like cliff notes on it, but I've never read the whole book. And now you just convinced me I need to go read it. And there's another book that I just read called The Hype Handbook by Michael Sheen, talking about how like cult leaders and propagandists used hype to create that equity, and how you can, if used for good, right? You need to like get away from like the propagandists and cult leaders. Take hype and create it for good.
I was just thinking, Rob, was like, well...
Yeah. The whole idea is like, how do you take it for good and make it good to help build a brand in a marketplace? Yeah. And one of the things that I coach on is startup marketing is so different. And a lot of times people spout, Uber did it. And let's not even use IBM. Let's start using like whatever. We still all talk about Uber and Airbnb and all the... Those are 1 in a million companies, right? Unicorns and the way they do this. And so you can't take that same approach. You got to create that startup playbook that is built on grit and sweat and put things together to make things happen. So having resources like building your own hype, right? Talking about yourself, using yourself as the first mouthpiece, and then building it from there. I love it. So I'll have to check that one out. Sounds like a great one. So as we close out, right, what is your lasting message that you want listeners to take away from this episode?
I would say that as humans, we're all biased in our own ways, even when we're not. Maybe especially, even when we don't think we are, right? Even when we think we're not. And I would say even especially when we think we're not. And those are the moments when you can grow, right? If you, at some point, realize, oh yeah, I was wrong about this because I had an irrational view on the world. Like those are like moments of discovery. And that's also a big theme of what we work on in Swyg, like bias in hiring. But human bias is a very normal thing. It exists everywhere. But the more you can be aware of it, the more you can also start like making better decisions and growing as a person.
I love that. I mean, the first step is acknowledgement, right? If we acknowledge that we have our own internal biases, whether we want to believe it or not, when we start acknowledging those things and we get curious, we learn. And when we learn, we can take steps to growth, right? I love it. I love that lasting message, and it's a great way to close out when we think about what Swig's mission is and how we're trying to change, how you are trying to change the way hiring's done. And I'm excited to see the growth of Swyg and excited to see what that looks like. And so, as we close out here, where can we find you? How can people connect with you? You offer just a chat. Where do they reach out to find Vincent?
There's Like, I'm really easy to find. So I'm on LinkedIn, and there's only one person with my name. My last name, Lonij, Lonij. You type that in, Vincent Lonij. That's me. There's only one of me. So LinkedIn is easy to find. Also, vincent@swyg.com is my email address. I check my email every day, so that's a good way to reach me. So either LinkedIn or email is good places. Also,
Awesome.
If you're just generally interested in keeping up with what's going on with Swyg, also LinkedIn is a good place. I post updates there on a regular basis, so even if you don't feel the need or the courage to reach out personally, just come and connect with me on LinkedIn or follow me there, and then you can stay up to date to everything that's going on in Swyg.
Love that. And I'll make sure to link Vincent's LinkedIn in the show notes. I'll also put the Swyg company page in the show notes, and I'll also link your email in the show notes so they can easily click and find you and connect with you. And, Vincent, I appreciate you for being a part of the Bare Necessities of Entrepreneurship podcast and talking about Swyg and how Swyg is changing the game of hiring and really looking at this. And so I just want to remind everybody in Bare Nation out there, connect with Vincent, follow along, take a look, try out the product, give them some feedback. And, Vincent, thank you so much for being a part of it. We appreciate you. And I'll be sending you some stuff in the mail as a little thank you gift for being a part of the program.
Awesome. And it's been a real pleasure being here, Rob. It's great talking to you as always. And I think it's amazing that you're doing this podcast for the startup community and for all entrepreneurs out there. So keep it going. Let me know what I can do to support. And it's been an absolute pleasure being here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vincent. And Bare Nation, thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Bare Nation, once again, thank you for listening to the Bare Necessities of Entrepreneurship. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. And until next time, take care.